Robert Allen Zimmerman, better known by his stage name Bob Dylan, was born on May 24, 1941 in Duluth, Minnesota. Dylan's musical and poetic style has profoundly influenced many musicians and artists during the past 6 decades. He is widely considered to be one of the most important cultural figures of the 20th century. Early life and family. Dylan was born to Abraham and Beatrice Beatty Zimmerman, the second child of 6 siblings. His mother's side of the family originated from Lithuania, where they immigrated first to the United States and then to Canada before settling in Duluth when Dylan's mother was just a child. Dylan's paternal grandparents were Jews who fled from Lithuania in the early 1900s. Dylan had a difficult childhood, growing up in a poor but culturally Jewish family. His father worked as a furniture dealer but struggled with health issues, forcing Dylan's mother to work as a housekeeper and bookkeeper to support the family. Dylan was very close with his maternal grandparents, who spoke little English and filled their home with Yiddish literature, music and traditions. In 1948, Dylan's family moved to Hibbing, Minnesota, where Dylan spent most of his formative years. In Hibbing, Dylan developed an early interest in music, listening to the rock and roll, blues and country music played on the radio. He learned to play the guitar and harmonica and began writing poetry and simple songs as a teenager. Early musical career in Hibbing and New York City. After graduating from Hibbing High School in 1959, Dylan spent time traveling around the United States, playing small gigs in coffee houses and bars. He adopted the stage name Bob Dylan to protect his identity and distance himself from his Jewish upbringing. In 1961, Dylan moved to New York City and established himself as an up-and-coming folk musician, gaining exposure in Greenwich Village's folk scene. Dylan quickly signed his first record contract and released his self-titled debut album in 1962. The album showcased his skills as a budding acoustic singer-songwriter. His simplistic yet poignant lyrics about love, loss and the human condition quickly captivated music listeners around the world. In 1963, Dylan released his sophomore album The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. The album introduced Dylan's protest songs with lyrics addressing issues like racial inequality, economic hardship and the growing anti-war sentiment among youth. Lyrics like "How many times must a man look up before he can see the sky?" helped establish Dylan as the voice of a generation. His increasing folk and protest songs during the 1960s aligned Dylan with the growing counterculture movement. He became a central figure during the civil rights movement and opposition to the Vietnam War. His poetic lyrics and lo-fi singing style redefined folk music, inspiring artists like Joan Baez and the Byrds. Move towards rock music and electric instrumentation. In 1965, Dylan made electric guitars and rock instrumentation a primary part of his music, releasing the albums Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61 Revisited and Blonde on Blonde. His mix of folk, rock and blues on these influential records stunned listeners around the world and polarized longtime folk fans who had come to embrace Dylan's acoustic protest songs. Dylan's shift towards rock music continued in 1966 with his legendary tour alongside musicians like Robbie Robertson and the band. The Bob Dylan and the Band tour saw fans reacting angrily to Dylan's new electric sets. Dylan's performance at the infamous Newport Folk Festival was met with boos and heckling, marking an official break with folk purists. Despite criticism, Dylan continued to expand his musical palette on albums like John Wesley Harding and Nashville Skyline. He also scored the soundtrack album Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid in 1973. These albums displayed Dylan's growing embrace of country music and rock styles. Later career and continued recognition. In the late 1970s and 1980s, Dylan released a series of well-received albums that further blurred the lines between folk, rock and country music. He also embarked on several prominent tours throughout these decades. However, Dylan's popularity declined during the 1990s as he struggled to replicate the success of his earlier albums. Dylan has remained remarkably prolific in spite of his aging. Since the late 1990s, he has released over a dozen full-length recordings, winning 2 Grammy Awards for Best Contemporary Folk Album. In 2012, Dylan was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama. In 2016, Dylan was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for having created new poetic expressions within the great American song tradition. The Swedish Academy praised Dylan's poetic lyrics that capture the material and spiritual heritage of America. Dylan became the first songwriter to win the Nobel Prize. Here are a few more interesting facts and major events in Bob Dylan's life and career. Dylan grew up idolizing Woody Guthrie, a folk singer who became a huge influence on Dylan's musical style and lyrics. Dylan even visited Guthrie when he was sick in a New Jersey hospital, forming a close relationship with the aging singer. In 1965, Dylan faced massive backlash from folk purists when he went electric with rock instrumentation at the Newport Folk Festival. Folk music at the time was traditionally acoustic and anti-commercial. Dylan's move towards a more rock sound was seen as a betrayal by some fans. After a motorcycle accident in 1966, Dylan retreated from public life for several years. Some speculate that Dylan may have even undergone facial plastic surgery after the crash, which altered his appearance. However, Dylan has denied the surgery rumors over the years. Dylan's lyrics have often been filled with poetic ambiguity that intentionally leave room for multiple interpretations. Some see his lyrics as cryptic and surreal, while others view them as having deep spiritual and political meaning. Scholars continue to analyze and debate Dylan's lyricism. Throughout his career, Dylan has been resistant to autobiographical analysis of his songs. He rarely discussed the personal meaning or inspiration behind his lyrics, preferring for listeners to interpret his words how they want. Dylan has been married twice, first to Sarah Lones from 1965 to 1977, and then to Carolyn Dennis from 1986 to 1992. He has a total of 6 children from these marriages and other relationships. Despite his success as one of the world's most recognized musicians, Dylan has generally shunned mainstream popular culture and celebrity lifestyle. He prefers to live a private life outside of the public eye. Here are some of Bob Dylan's most famous and well-known songs. Blowin' in the Wind, this iconic protest song from his 1963 album The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan touches on themes of freedom, peace and equality. The song's lyrics posed questions about social and political issues that still resonate today. The Times, They Are A-Changing, also from his 1963 album, this song captured the spirit of change and activism during the 1960s. The lyrics condemned political and cultural stagnation while celebrating the growing counterculture youth movement. Like a Rolling Stone, this 1965 single from the Highway 61 Revisited album is widely considered to be one of Dylan's greatest songs. The 6-minute track features Dylan's distinctive rock style with raw and politically charged lyrics. Tangled Up in Blue, this song from the 1975 album Blood on the Tracks displays Dylan's gift for poetic storytelling through lyrics that paint vivid pictures of relationships and changes over time. Knockin' on Heaven's Door, this 1973 song appeared on the soundtrack to the film Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid and has since become a classic rock radio staple. The simple lyrics and emotional delivery have resonated with listeners for decades. All Along the Watchtower, although Dylan originally wrote and recorded this song in 1967, Jimi Hendrix's influential psychedelic rock cover version catapulted it into mainstream popularity. Dylan's lyrics envision a dystopian world of uncertainty and crisis. Those are just some of the most iconic and popular songs from Dylan's extensive catalog spanning over 50 years. His songwriting genius and poetic lyricism led to many timeless anthems that continue to influence musicians and connect with listeners today.